No takesies, backsies. That's right. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about a subject that seems to be gaining a little bit more interest in the gay community, especially the idea of having children or being creating your own family. So I'd like to ask that question of you first. Do you want to have children someday? It's kind of surprising to us that when we look at the data, typically anywhere from about 40 to 50% of straight folks have children, roughly about 30 to 45%, 30 to 40% of lesbian couples have children, and about 20% of gay men have children. And we know that some of those are children that they've brought into their relationships, but there seems to be this growing number of folks who want to have or create a family who don't have children from a previous relationship. And we've talked a lot on the podcast, not only the Queer Money podcast, but even here in these Queer Money follow-ups over the last over 2 weeks now, about this idea of us being able to really do whatever it is that we want, right? As a community, as individuals, we are starting to gain this empowerment that we can do what we want. But I think there's some caution there.
Yeah. There is. Well, I think we're seeing the trend of more interest in the queer community having children because now same-sex couples can get married. And, now that we have that sort of stability, what's sort of the next rite of passage? And that is to have more of us to have children. We know from several Williams Institute studies that only about 20% of LGBT people have children. So we're starting to see that trend to pick up a little bit. But there is that sort of... There does seem to be that sort of, I want to have children and I want to have children now, Veruca Salt mentality.
Yes.
And, it's when you go to some of the more popular websites about same-sex couples, specifically gay couples having children, it seems to be like there's just no hold-barred approach to having children. We don't care what we have to do. And in some ways that makes sense, but in some ways it's really putting us in a precarious position in many ways, but most especially financially.
Yeah. Well, I started the Queer Money episode 16 of the podcast with this whole idea of I'm pregnant. Oops. Right. I mean, that doesn't really happen for same-sex couples. There's not really a possibility for that to happen.
Big surprise.
Right. There really shouldn't be that kind of thing. Well, unless maybe there's some infidelity going on, or
that's a different kind of surprise.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea there is that we have the opportunity to plan ahead. Speaking of planning ahead, make sure that you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and you click on the notifications so that you don't miss it when we go live with other episodes throughout the week. All right. But going back to this whole idea of the option or the opportunity for us to plan ahead when it comes to having a family, that means that if we want to and choose to, we can plan so that it doesn't have an adverse financial effect on us. One of the things that we hear a lot is that gay men especially are able to have these amazing lives because they don't have children. There is this very clear message that comes from the straight community that gay people are fabulous.
Dinks rule.
Right. There's this very clear message that the reason why you can take these fabulous vacations, have these nice homes, all this nice stuff, right? There goes my hand again. All this nice stuff is because we don't have kids. But if we don't do it the way that makes sense, we may end up like many of our straight counterparts where having children may end up being a financial burden.
Well, children are a financial burden. What is it? The last time that the USDA did a report, it was like $180,000
$243,000 to raise a child. One child, middle class child. We're not talking about like Uber.
First class.
Yeah, a middle class child from birth to basically till the end of getting out of high school, right?
So
not
18,
including college. You're going to spend about $240,000.
They're expensive. And for the most part, opposite sex couples can have children for very little cost, right? What does it cost? I think when our friends were having children, they were spending anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000, from start to finish with all the prenatal care and the doctor's visits and then the actual birthing. But that's, and that's expensive in and of itself for lots of people. You add on top of that especially for gay men, we have to hire out all the parts.
Right.
We have to hire out almost all the ingredients to actually make it work, and that gets very expensive.
Right. Yeah. Going back to the comment that you made about this whole idea of these websites that are out there encouraging, especially gay men, to have families, which is great. But one of the things that we were so surprised by was this idea that the planning process, the financial planning process, didn't even include saving.
Yeah.
It did not talk about, they gave the top 3 ways that you can have plan for having financially plan for having children. 2 of them were borrowing money, and the second one was asking your parents to pay for your kids.
Right. So there is no actual financial planning strategy for gay men to have children, at least according to some of these websites. It's just about it's family planning lending or family planning borrowing.
Right.
And when we talked with Adrian in this particular episode, he said it can cost upwards of $150,000 depending upon all of the requirements that you need to have children. And if you go the surrogacy route, it's definitely more expensive. And if depending upon your circumstances and where you live in the world, the circumstances can be even more exorbitant. So that's why you're kind of pushing the $150,000 mark. Borrowing that much money is gonna put any couple, any family in a very difficult situation. Asking your mom and dad to fork over money that they've saved, the little money they've got saved left for retirement, to help pay for your child, that's a burden on them, and they might want to do it. But it's not the responsibility of your parents to sort of fork over $50,000 so that you can breed.
They're buying grandchildren.
Right. They're literally buying grandchildren. And it just makes no sense to me that you would take out a $150,000, even a $50,000 loan from any organization, no matter how, esoteric they claim to be, or altruistic they claim to be, that you're still going to pay an interest on that. You're just taking out a $50,000 loan. What is the return on that? You have a child, and there's a lot of happiness that comes with that. But you estimated that it could cost upwards of $1,000 a month to pay that loan back.
No, there was one organization that was saying that they would loan up to $65,000 towards the process of having children. Obviously, you had to go through them, right? But they would loan up to $65,000 towards the process of having a child. No guarantees that that's all it's going to cost. It's possible it could cost considerably more than that. So if you borrowed $65,000, they want you to pay that back in anywhere from 3 to 6 years, which meant that you would have to be paying that back at a rate of about $1,000 to $2,000 a month. So ask yourself, on top of the extra costs of having mouths to feed, rooms to fill, decorate, exactly. And we know we don't decorate cheaply, right? As gay couples, we're going to want to do it fabulous, right? All of the costs of having the child come home and the daily costs of having a child, adding an additional $1,000 to $2,000. So could your budget take an additional $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month so that you can bring a child into your family?
Yeah, who has that money?
Right, well, not saying that it's not possible, but please remember this. Remember that those are the costs of having a child. For one of the reasons why we say finances is different for the queer community, especially same-sex couples, is that we have this additional financial burden if we're going to start a family. And I'd ask you, is that the way that you want to start your family off, right? You're super excited about bringing this child home. Your emotions are really high. It's a wonderful thing to have a child in the house. I know because my ex and I had a child together. There's a lot of great feelings there. But imagine the financial costs and what that could do to you and your family. that
Right.
could really erase a lot of those emotions. We know that people already fight about money. People have a difficult time talking and exposing the truth about their personal finances, even couples. One of the biggest questions that we get as debt-free guys is, how do I get my partner on the same page financially with me? And then you have couples who are in this situation saying, oh, we're going to bring kids into the world, but we don't know.
We don't care how we finance it. We're just
Right.
going to borrow from everybody, beg, borrow, and steal from everybody.
Right.
Hopefully mom and dad die young so that it's not so much of a burden and we don't have to pay them back.
Right.
One of the... good, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's easy to want to get critical here, and that's not our intent. The intent here is to talk about surrogacy and the costs of surrogacy and how we need to be thinking ahead for this. And one of the things that Adrian really kind of highlighted was that he and his husband, they investigated different possible scenarios, the three primary scenarios that they thought would happen when they were going to use surrogacy for having their son. And then what they did is they put a cost label on each of those scenarios. And one of the things I did appreciate when I was watching one of these videos or looking at the information about these surrogacy organizations is they said plan an additional 20%, at least 20% contingency to built into your costs for things that don't necessarily go right, like IVF not taking the first time, that there are additional needs for the surrogate. She may have additional needs during her pregnancy that you will have to pay for. And one of the things that I really appreciated what Adrian said was that they were lucky enough to not have IVF take the first 2 times, which meant that they actually had a longer time period to plan ahead financially. Had it taken place or taken the very first time, he said they were not prepared financially and don't know what would have happened to them because they may not have had the money to be able to do it right? So use the opportunity, the advantage that you have that you cannot get pregnant through an oopsie as your way of planning ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not being critical of people who want to have children and choosing whatever route makes the most sense for them.
Right.
What I'm critical of is some of these sites that are trying to promote and advocate that same-sex couples have children, but then also advocating that don't actually incorporate any financial planning, include financial borrowing and lending.
Right.
And that's what I'm critical of. What really I was really impressed with when Adrian and his husband prepared for having their children was not only before the IVF not taking once or twice, they still prepared significantly. They did a lot of research. They started saving a ton of money. He said that they had a rental property that they were getting saving rent on.
Actually, no. They moved out of they moved out of their home into an apartment and rented out their home.
Oh, right.
So that they would be spending less money and they could save money to have their children.
So they did some things to help save money in case that first IVF took. Fortunately, as Adrian said, it didn't take it the first couple times, and they had that much more time to save. They also looked at some other options to help with the financing, not in a lending way, but they found not only did one of their employers able to help out, but they also with whatever the healthcare plan that they were on also offered some subsidies. Hard
Easy
to
for
say.
you to say.
Exactly. So they looked at some options, whereas we kind of got the impression from some of these websites was just
go do it.
None of that was actually factored in. It was just go do it and worry about borrowing money from somebody else later after the fact, and that's just the problem that we have in America, in general, because we just borrow everything, we finance everything on a low monthly payment, but $1,000, $2,000 a month is not a low monthly payment.
Yeah, I remember we talked to another Adrian. This Adrian works with was the director of an organization in Colorado that helps helps parents adopt children. And one of the interesting things is through that organization, and the vast majority of adoption organizations, they do a financial bench test to see if you are financially able to adopt, to be able to weigh the costs of having a child, right? And I'm wondering if maybe some of these surrogacy organizations, in their desire to help us fulfill that emotional want, that emotional need, that emotional attachment that we have to having a family, that they're skipping over the financial test to see if having a child or having children through the surrogacy process could actually drive us into financial ruin.
Well, not only that, but what kind of environment are you creating for the children that you have, right? If mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom are constantly stressed about finances and fighting about finances all the time, what kind of vibration or energy is that creating in that house, and how is that kid growing up?
Right.
That's me, and that was kind of what that Adrian's said, that their concern was that they didn't want to put these families in financially precarious positions, thereby creating a negative environment for the children.
Yeah, it's interesting. We watched, while having lunch today, we watched a very short, I think it was 6 or 8 minute video on YouTube about how childhood trauma can lead to addiction. Oftentimes is the cause of addiction. And I'm wondering if the kind of childhood trauma that can come from parents fighting all the time, and the lack of attachment that a child may have to the parents because of that fighting, could lead to addiction.
Right.
So you don't want to raise an addict, right? but your financial stress in your family could cause. I mean, we hear about this all the time. Parents fighting all the time over money, right?
Well, it's one of the top 3 reasons why couples get divorced, right? So you have that much acrimony, and somebody separates. Well, it's not just the mom and dad that are separating, or the dad and dad, or mom and mom. It's the family is being separated, and what are the consequences to the children?
Right.
And this is why I think one of the pull-out quotes from this particular episode was when Adrian said that if he were to do it all over again, he would hire an expert to help him out with the entire process. And ideally, that expert would have some sort of financial awareness about the process, and be able to get that same-sex couple on the right page financially, to be able to make this process a little bit less burdensome from start to finish.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting that there are some things and some aspects of this that you can do on your own, right? You can learn information, but there are some aspects where doing it yourself, a DIY surrogacy is, well, there really isn't a DIY surrogacy, right? But a DIY surrogacy planning process is probably going to be very difficult. Paying for the expertise can help ease the emotional stress of going through that whole process.
And there might be there's that cognitive dissonance to say, hey, you guys are espousing saving money, but you also want me to hire a professional. Well, if a professional is good and they know that they're worth their salt, then in the long run they should be able to not only make the process a little bit less stressful, but they should be able to help you save money than you otherwise would if you did the process on your own, and you kind of this not being your area of expertise, you making a bunch of mistakes in the process.
Yeah.
So what are the 6 steps, David?
Well, having this conversation with Adrian was really good, because it was a different flavor of surrogacy that John and I were not as familiar with. We have friends who have gone through the surrogacy process and adoption process, but Adrian and his husband lived in Tel Aviv, and they were their whole process of surrogacy involved in an international surrogate from India. But it was interesting because we touched on this whole idea of border crossing and what that means for same-sex couples who decide to have children, not only just through surrogacy, but also through adoption. And so these were 6 things that we wanted to pull out, because with the mobility of people today, especially when you think of younger individuals,
sans COVID,
right? Yes, right. Wanting to explore the world and wanderlust a little bit more, right? So we wanted to kind of highlight some of these. That remember, number one, remember that not all countries recognize same-sex marriage. And when you're working within those borders, that's going to expose you to some risk. So if you and your partner want to go to another country, whether that's for a visit, that short-term stay, or maybe even a longer-term stay, you have to remember that that the laws in that country around same-sex marriage may not work in your favor if you have children. So investigate that. Then number two, many countries have contradictory laws when it comes to same-sex families, and you want to investigate those differences. Again, the differences for whether you're going to be traveling there or staying there, there are some laws that are beneficial towards same-sex families in places like Canada, some countries in Europe, but even countries right next door may have very different laws, so you have to be very careful. Number three, and I think this is a really important one, that when you are thinking about the family planning process, as a couple, you don't want to deny each other's emotions. When you want to make sure that you are having a honest, genuine conversation, that both of your voices count. You need to talk it through because it is a huge commitment, right? We know that having children is no longer an 18-year commitment. We know that we are now seeing kids come back into the household.
It's like 25 years these days.
Right, on a regular basis.
When do you get off health insurance? It's
26,
26,
right?
So.
Up until you're 26. So it's
Yikes.
exactly. It could, and we know some kids even after they're 26 are moving back in with their parents, especially
still on mom and dad's phone plan.
Right. Well, and especially during COVID, we're seeing this happen. Individuals who are living on their own. And some of this is for mental health and community reasons are moving back in with their families. But make sure that you're talking about all of those associated risks and concerns that you have as a couple have. Number four, and this kind of goes back to Adrian's comment, hire professionals to help you through the process. It means you're going to be at a greater expense, but it's going to reduce your stress and your risk. Number five, do your research. Find out who all the players are. Don't just go to the first surrogacy or adoption center that you're aware of or that your friends tell you about. You want to look around. And remember that you have unique advantages and disadvantages. You want to cover those. You, as John mentioned, Adrian was able to get some support from the company that he worked for towards surrogacy. Your company may help with surrogacy or adoption. Your health insurance company may help with one or both of those, so you want to check those out. And then finally, number six, plan ahead. Plan ahead. Plan ahead. Plan ahead emotionally, plan ahead physically, plan ahead financially. As we've said here, you don't want to start your family off with a bunch of financial stress that could be passed down to your children or separate your family in the long term. You want to have your family together, right? So don't bring in the financial stress that could actually separate you.
So thank you for joining us for another Queer Money follow-up. Tomorrow, join us again for number 16. I can't believe we're on number 16, where we'll talk about, this was a fun episode. David and I had a couple glasses of wine, and we decided to whine about success. So I don't know. It's dry January for us right now, so we can't bring wine tomorrow.
We won't be repeating the wine tomorrow.
If you want to come with wine, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And then let us know again in the comments below if you plan on having children. We'd love to hear whether or not you are and what your process is for doing so.
Yeah. So a Queer Money takeaway from this episode is that if you're having children, remember that it's an emotional and a financial decision. And remember that the costs are more for us as same-sex couples. Don't start your family off with that financial stress. Do your homework first.
Exactly. And lastly, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel. Set notifications on so you don't miss when we go live with Queer Money follow-ups. And again, continue the conversation in the comments below or in the Queer Money Facebook group. Thank you, and we will see you tomorrow. Where's the off button?